All right, Jim, we're back.
We're back.
Episode 3.
We've hung in for 3 episodes now. It's gone
Exactly.
longer than anyone thought it would.
So. We've now officially have a trilogy. So
we have exactly. We have a trilogy. This might go under the "quit while you're ahead" category. We'll see. But,
yeah.
But we at least we need this episode and the next one because we're going to pull some stuff together. So.
Exactly. But it continues to get traction. I'm pretty excited about it. Lots of good feedback and stuff too. So that's awesome.
My wife's enjoying it. So
good. Yeah. I heard somebody today actually tell me that he's like, it's also very re-listenable. He's like, there's just a lot in there. And so he's like, I was trying to remember exactly what y'all said. And he's like, you started from the beginning again. And he's like, it's just very good. So that's what we want.
Nice. Well, and it won't be long and we'll be having Great Dangerous Books. We're pretty nice.
Yeah.
Like that. So.
Absolutely. And along with the courses and all kinds of fun stuff. Yeah. Maybe eventually a conference. I don't know. See where this goes.
Yeah, you never know, right? Let's see who shows up for a dangerous conference.
Exactly. So today we've got another essay, kind of like we said, like this is called The Great Dangerous Books, but a lot of the books we want to really dive into are like 800 pages. So trying to do podcast episodes along with that is a little difficult,3although we will be diving into, I'm sure, like specific chapters in certain books and stuff like that as well. Mm-hmm. Just the other night we were talking about Jean-Paul Sartre. Was it existential therapy or existential...
the existential psychoanalysis section.
Psychoanalysis.
Being and nothingness. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe what we'll do there eventually is we'll have like a being and nothingness overview, and then we'll dive into some chapters or something.
Yeah.
We're going to do some big meaty books. I like the idea of doing this too as what is like a reasonable read along for the listener.
Yes.
For the episode 1, you could see, hey, we're doing this short essay by Freud. Go ahead, read that essay, and then come back and listen to the podcast. Episode 2, we did Kant's essay and answer to the question, what is enlightenment? Easy. That's probably a 20-minute read, And now today we're coming back with another short essay by Kant, which is his universal history with a cosmopolitan intent. And here too, if you've not read the essay, I think we'll probably have it linked, wherever this podcast shows up. Maybe go hit that link, read that essay, come back, and then listen to this, and you can hear what we have to say about it, or use what we're doing as a primer to read that. I have found, in the decades of frustrated classroom teaching that I've have behind me now. The best way to teach Kant are these short essays that he wrote during his critical period, but they're not in the critical works. And things like What is Enlightenment, things Universal History, Cosmopolitan Intent. The preface to Religion Within the Bounds of Reason Alone is a standalone essay that works beautifully. I think you can get a lot of what's really important from Kant in these shorter essays that are actually manageable chunks for the lay reader.
Yeah, absolutely. I prefer, even when I'm teaching Plato, that I would prefer to do the dialogues, just because there's so much more kind of easily read, and the Republic is awesome, don't get me wrong, but the amount of time you have to spend in order to get through it takes a pretty good chunk. So it's a course by itself. Exactly.
Really I do Plato when I teach it 10 books, 10 classes, and that's a bit too fast, I think.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So
should we do this essay?
Dive in.
Kant, yeah. Again, the Kant wrote this essay, I believe, in
1784.
84. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's, what is it? Before, it's the same year as An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment? Mm-hmm. And it's in the critical period. It's after the first critique. So kind of high water, the height of Kant's powers here. Okay. Yep. This is Kant, I think, taking the project that he laid out in the Enlightenment essay, which is mainly an ethical project. There's some politics there, but now he's playing politics and even geopolitics in this essay, which is interesting, right? Where we're going to go next in our series. It's going to be very important that we're thinking of it that way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so it's interesting the way he lays the essay out. We get a brief introduction. And then he lays out, 9 theses that he then explains. And I think what we'll do is we'll comment a bit in the introduction, and then we'll go through each of those 9 theses and see if the sparks fly. How's that sound?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Good. Yeah. Anything you want to get going on the introduction, Jared? Or
Uh, I mean, I don't know how much we want to. I mean, it's honestly so readable. So I was like,
yeah,
I don't know, should we read the whole thing? But it's 3 paragraphs. So,
sure.
but I do think laying out kind of like what his project is right now is important to try to give
Mhm.
this some context. And I
Yeah,
also thought it would be a good way to start to talk about like why this essay following the previous
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Why the idea of history or the idea of progress right after the idea of enlightenment.
yeah,
And it seems to me like part of his project here is to take what's happening, especially in the scientific revolution at the time, or the moment of the scientific boom, and try to think about history in a similar sense of how it progresses, how it moves. And so it seems like that Kant is trying to, especially like you said, like in a geopolitical way. So by cosmopolitan, he's really meaning right the interrelation between states and a
yeah.
kind of an international historical movement and the way it works. Um,
Ultimately, he's talking about world peace. He's making a
yeah,
prediction of an
yeah, and
almost
wasn't it? I think it
inevitable
was like
world
10
peace.
years
Yeah,
later he wrote his piece or his work
yeah.
on perpetual peace.
On a perpetual peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting in the introduction, and I think it. I wish I don't know if I guess if I were a better scholar, I would know this. Which piece was written first? What is Enlightenment or this one?
Hmm.
It's interesting because you at least on the reading that we offered of the previous piece, you have this radical notion of human freedom in there. Like
Yeah.
Kant thinks that humans are capable of operating free of any self-interested motive whatsoever, right? And in some of the background materials that we see surrounding that, I say, in Kant's view, the human will is undetermined, completely, full stop.
Yeah.
Okay, and you'd wonder then, okay, could there possibly be a grounds for any kind of prediction for the outcome of human history, one way or another? If humans are absolutely radically free, why think this is going to come out well or good or anyway? Okay, and so he starts this essay then by basically addressing that. Like he says,
Hmm.
like humans are free. We have a radically free will. He's not taking that back,
Hmm.
but he still thinks there can be laws of freedom, and not just in the sense of normative laws. Like there's Kant thinks the very notion of freedom entails that there's laws as to what we ought to do, because the very
Hmm.
notion of ought entails can, which entails freedom for Kant. But he also thinks there's something like predictive laws of freedom. He says in this introduction here that even though each individual human is radically free as to who they marry or whether they marry, he says it's still perfectly predictable that humans will marry. Okay.
Hmm.
And Kant doesn't think that means we're not free. It just, he thinks that there's rational principles that will inevitably appeal to rational parties. Right.
Yes.
And so he starts out by saying, the way I read it is he's trying to give us a sense that this dichotomy between the possibility of a sort of scientific understanding of human politics that would allow us to make predictions as somehow being inconsistent with radical human freedom, for Kant, that's a false dichotomy,
Yeah.
right? Because he's making a big prediction about an inevitability of human progress because we're free, right?
Yes.
Like he wants to say that our freedom entails a kind of inevitability of human progress, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me too like what he's making a teleological assumption as well about the route that humanity's going.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
that there's a certain purpose by which we act upon and kind of enact into the world, right? So we
right,
we participate in it, but we're also actors in it. Like we pull some
right,
of the handles as well.
yeah,
And so he's assuming that human beings do have purpose, and I think part of it is radical freedom, right? Because we'll get into it later in the essay, but ultimately he sees radical freedom as where we're going, what we're
right.
progressing towards.
Yeah, and for Kant, there is a sort of, I think he does say providence at one point here or there in the essay. I think for Kant that's a bit of a hand wave, probably.
Hmm.
There's a sort of secular teleology built into this,
Hmm.
that he thinks that the very reason itself has an end that it's moving us to here, right?
Yeah.
And there is a kind of inevitability, right? And I think this may be important to note here. This idea of a progressive history, okay, certainly, like you have that in Christian theology, in some ways in in the Middle Ages and the early Christian period, but you don't have that in the Greeks, right?
Right.
There's
a circuit there.
In a
Yeah.
sense, Aristotle doesn't have a historical sense at all, right? The whole thing is a grand cycle. It's going on for infinity. It's going to go on for infinity. And sometimes doesn't even sound like he thinks things are going to repeat themselves, right, in this cycle. Plato, has a creation event, but it's not like the universe is coming to an end, and he calls it an image of the eternal, a moving image of the eternal. So there's nothing progressive. It's not going anywhere. Like your life might go somewhere, but human history as a whole isn't going anywhere.
Yes.
Whereas by the time you get to Kant, you actually have a secularized version of a kind of apocalyptic vision here, right? There's an eschatology that's built into this. That's not theologically tinted in any way, that he thinks that there is an end state of things that we're coming to that will be almost utopian. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So why don't we have a look at the theses, right?
Let's do it.
Good. Okay. So the first thesis, and I think we're using the same translation. Like this is the one I use for class. It's from Marxist.org, right?
Rob Lucas.
Which is, by the way, a treasure trove of texts, by the way.
Yeah, I've actually
free reads.
Just recently found out about that website, and
yeah, it is a
there's
treasure
a lot.
Trove. Yeah, right. Okay, so first thesis, I'll read it. The thesis is simply all natural capacities of a creature are destined to evolve completely to their natural end. And this is short, so I'll just go ahead and do the surrounding paragraph. Observation of both the outward form and inward structure of all animals confirms this of them. An organ that is of no use, an arrangement that does not achieve its purpose, are contradictions in the teleological theory of nature. If we give up this fundamental principle, we no longer have a lawful but an aimless course of nature, and blind chance takes the place of the guiding thread of reason. Okay, so he's interestingly here, like he's anticipating some stuff that will go on in the third critique, and even somewhat went on in the first critique, that he does think that it's impossible to like approach nature scientifically without an implicit assumption of teleology for Kant. Okay, even though he doesn't think that commits you to anything metaphysically, that it commits you to a creator God or anything like that, or designing intelligence, he does think that it's impossible to make sense of things without teleology. Okay, so for him, the idea that you could have like truly vestigial organs in an organism is unthinkable, and that would be the very end in the bad sense of a science of nature. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we might wonder now how seriously we can take that after some of the insults that we've talked about that humanity has suffered, especially the Darwinian insult, right? That a lot of what goes on in organisms is less than optimal. It's just been good enough, and maybe there's things in there that are actually hangovers from earlier periods that are maladaptive now. Okay, but Kant still has this view of a nature suffused with teleology, and like the idea that you could have purposeless things in nature is unthinkable to him, right? Right. Okay. So
inheriting bad knees from my father and from my grandfather. Yeah, it's like it's not getting better.
Or the example I always use is the human spine. Okay, so is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's pretty good because if you got to like look out for big cats on the plains, like standing upright and looking forward is pretty useful. Okay, but floating a bowling ball on top of a semi-rigid rope is not a good idea either. Okay,
exactly.
And we have humans are plagued by, my understanding is, by back problems that other primates are not. Why? The human spine, the upright posture.
Yep.
Okay, so it serves a purpose, but there's a lot of purposelessness that comes with it. Okay, now I'm not sure Kant is at this point properly attuned to that. Okay.
Yes.
But you can see where it's going now. So what he's going to say is, if humans have an organ, a rational faculty, it must serve a purpose. And moreover, it must serve a purpose that's exhaustive, right? It must be such that it can realize its fullest potential, right? For him, the idea that there would be intelligence or rationality built into us that's essentially like an appendix, right? A vestigial organ is unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So what would you say then that he would see as the fully developed? Is it some kind of like godlike level of intelligence, physical perfection, emotional perfection, is that the level that he's aiming at, or is it something still very human? Does that make sense? Like there's at some point we become almost like Ubermen, right?
Yeah, I think for Kant, it's going to be, as he puts it, I think it's in the Prolegomenon to Metaphysics and Morals, that it's the third or fourth version of the categorical imperative there is, to act in such a way that you are the king in a kingdom of kings, right? Like that, like you're acting as though you're legislating a law that will apply to other people who are themselves entitled to legislate laws. Okay.
Yeah.
So for Kant, the full realization of human reason would be when we are in a situation we all treat each other as maximally rational, fully dignified agents.
Yeah.
Right? And we talked about this last time, and you can see what he's envisioning here, and that will go on, both in like the scale of your personal life, in at the level of national politics and global politics. Like ultimately, the full realization of reason for Kant will be when we are all fully capable and actually doing the business of legislating as though we were kings in a kingdom of kings, right? That we are treating ourselves and others as fully capable of legislating their lives for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And again, for Kant, that doesn't mean everyone's going to do their own thing, because if we're all freely legislating, we'll all operate by reason and we'll come to the same law, right?
Yeah. Which it's so hard because like I think I understand his point, but it's very difficult to be almost 200 years after him and look back and say, it didn't really work out so far, in the last.
It all made perfectly good sense to World War I, right?
Exactly.
Right.
But a lot of the philosophies that come out right before World War I too, that like the dream didn't happen, and now all of a sudden we're bombing each other.
They're saying, look out, this is not going to work out. And as we'll see when we talk about Conrad next week, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to the second thesis, because we're already getting to the second thesis, and I feel badly like we're pulling it out from the comp before we let him get it out here. But that's okay, right? We haven't. This isn't the Fairness to Great Books podcast,
right? Exactly.
Okay, so second thesis: in man, as the only rational creature on Earth, those natural capacities which are directed to the use of his reason are to be fully developed only in the race, not in the individual. Okay, now this is interesting. Okay. And I think this is going to get kind of some of the darker underbelly of the Enlightenment that we're going to explore in the sequel to this episode. But Kant is not saying there's any guarantee that any one human individual will achieve this status of being a king in a kingdom of kings. Right? In fact, there's going to be a lot of us who are sort of grist for the mill of that process. Right? That and he talks about how like all we can do is sort of advance civilization closer to that ideal of the kingdom of kings as best we can, and then pass the torch on to the next generation.
That's right.
And so he's saying is like, the point is not that like Jared pulled this off, right? The point is that this be pulled off on the broadest scale possible, species wide, race wide, his word.
Yes.
Right. Some people worry whether race was accidental here or not, right? But it that be pulled off like species wide. And it's not about us as individuals pointed off. Like we are a means that ultimate achievement of the kingdom of kings.
Yes. Yeah, it requires our death.
Right? Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, yeah.
I mean, because that historical, he doesn't really use the term spirit much in here. He uses nature a lot, but I can't help get Hegel out of my head. But it seems to me like what he's saying is like the purposes of the laws of nature, you're just participating in until we can reach this level of perfection eventually. But like you said, for now, you're grist for the mill. But you should still do your part, which I think is actually a pretty good message, actually.
It's a pretty good message, yeah. It's where we talked about that interesting tension, irony between individualism and universalism in Kant. I mean, it's about individual freedom, but for Kant, I achieve my individual freedom by assuring that others do so too, right?
Yes.
To be in the space of reasons is to reason not as Jim, but as any other rational being would reason.
Yes.
Right. And the way I do that practically, like, is I treat Jared as as a free, rational individual capable of making up his own mind, right? I mean, my main job for Kant is to recognize you as a free agent and then get out of your way. So,
Yeah.
right. But once again, for Kant, I only really achieved that in as much as I'm working to achieve it on a grand scale, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because if you think of something like arts or politics, I think it feels like, especially around this time, you have the excitement of the American experiment, and you have the excitement of a king that answers to a parliament, and you have this movement towards more and more freedom. And that's in the political realm, but in the arts as well, you think of like there's all this grand art that comes out of the Enlightenment, and it continues to grow into this high culture. But again, because of where we're at in our piece of history, not all of that works out, right? Like,
Yeah,
like, like I'm not real sure how much the arts have really advanced in the past 50 years. There's a lot of great music that I like and stuff, but I mean, I'm about to go to Europe and I'm going to see some of the cathedrals and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. So
exactly.
where's the progress? It's and politically too. I mean, I highly doubt the founding fathers would have thought the Leviathan that is the government now, with all of its behemoth, ins and outs. They'd be like, this is not what we had in mind. The progress, it seems like maybe a big deep breath happened, and all of a sudden the culture just was like, I'm tired of trying or something. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we're less in conscious control than we thought we were.
Yeah, exactly.
Could be a recurring theme on here, I think. All right, third thesis. You want to take this one?
Yep. Third thesis. Nature has willed that man should, by himself, produce everything that goes beyond the mechanical ordering of his animal existence, and that he should partake of no other happiness or perfection than that which he himself, independently of instinct, has created by his own reason.
Yeah, I really like this one. I think it's part of a kind of the perennial wisdom about human nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that, like, we're not like very strong relative to our size for animals. We're not very fast relative to our size for animals. I guess we have pretty good endurance compared to a lot of animals.
Yeah.
We're more of an endurance sport guys, right? But we're good at teamwork. We're pretty smart. We can figure things out. So if we're going to get claws, we got to build them.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to get like muscle, we're going to have to get a mechanical advantage. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to, get something somewhere very fast, we're going to have to do it through a communication network. Right. And I think what Kant's getting at here is humans our great adaptation, our great advantage is our intelligence. And that then means, though, we are going to have to make things for ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to develop ourselves and our culture and our civilization, because really culture and civilization are our great adaptive advantages, and we are going to have to bring those to the point of perfection. Whereas, of course, like, species may change over time, but like when this or that turtle is hatched out, it gets the shell it gets, right, for that species, and that's as good as it's going to get. Which is an advantage to that, but because there's ways it can't go wrong that we go wrong, there's a disadvantage because it can't improve itself. And what Kant's saying here is, if humans are going to achieve anything like perfection, it will be up to us, right? By design, right? That's the great part of reason. That's the hard part of reason, right? Is that what comes of humanity as a species will largely be up to humans, okay? Mm-hmm. And I think once again, going back to another theme, for Kant, that is, as we'll see here, is going to be a source of optimism. Okay. Yes. I think for those of us sitting on this side of Hiroshima, right, we might wonder whether or not that's a matter of optimism or not. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, I thought it was interesting though that the line that says "independently of instinct." I'm sure Freud would have a lot to say about that, but it just seems like. And I get what he's trying to say, as far as like you to build yourself to perfection, the instinctuals and the lower passions will have to kind of take a rest, so that you can focus purely on the freedom of the will and the freedom of reason to be able to move forward with big grand things, right? Because instinct brings us a little bit lower. However, can you really get rid of instinct? For certain things, right? I mean, I build a house to also because I want shelter, because I don't want animals coming in here. I don't, there's there's always going to be instinct involved, even if it's just to build something really beautiful. It's like, well, I want, because I want my country to have something they're proud of, right? That's not
Yeah, and
pure
also,
reason.
let's, I've been to your opulent home, okay, and you may have built that simply to impress or intimidate other men, right?
Right.
As a matter of as a matter of instinct, and to act
Yes.
like we're all free of that is chimerical. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny with Kant. There's always similar to the last episode. There's always this like, yes, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like I agree that these dreams, these ideas are awesome, and they're something we should aspire to. But the reality of humanity is a little darker than that. So,
Speaking of which, though, fourth thesis, Kant is going to make a concession on that very point.
Yeah.
Do you want to read that?
Fourth thesis, the means employed by nature to bring about the development of all the capacities of men is their antagonism in society, so far as this is, in the end, the cause of a lawful order among men.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Kant is showing that he's not some naive rube here.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting that he's saying what primarily drives the development of reason in small p practical matters is competition.
Yes.
Right. And possible antagonism. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get better at making houses because I want to be more impressive than Jared. Right. Or I'm going to get better at whatever I'm doing so that I can like put more resources into my house to be more impressive than Jared. Right.
Yeah.
And Kant saying that antagonism is bad. It's when I'm not really thinking of Jared as a king in a kingdom of kings when I do that. However, it does advance the ball in terms of the small p practical progress of civilization. And so what Kant's saying here is there's an irony in this thing. We've seen it before that the sort of nasty side of individualism is kind of subservient or it's helping this sort of these universal ends of developing an overall more rational civilization, right?
Yeah. If I want to take down the elephant, I need a bigger gun, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's
right.
War is
what
a great
what I love here
creator.
is if you want to get more elephants than Jim, you're going to have to get a bigger gun, right? like he's saying, like it's antagonism among humans. That even though he thinks like we should be moving to get over that, he's admitting that drives part of the progress, right? And so, and once again, as we go in the like fifth, sixth, seventh theses here, he's gonna kind of tip his hat to some of the darker things here.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. Should I do the fifth thesis?
Yep. Go ahead.
Sure. Fifth thesis: the greatest problem for the human race, to the solution of which nature drives man, is the achievement of a universal civic society which administers laws among men. Okay. So what he did in the previous thesis is he said, look, competition, antagonism among individuals is good. It gets us going. It gets us doing things. It keeps us from being lazy and all that. But it has to be overcome if society, he does say this, if society is going to be coherent, right?
Yeah.
So, and so you and I have to both get over our instinctual need to be alpha males if we're going to like actually develop our rational capacities. And then thereby, and he does say then that's going to require like some kind of third party law to that we're both going to have to like obey. Okay. And now he's saying, but wait, if there's external threats to the civilization, okay, then that's always going to have consequences within it, right? And this is a lot of geopolitical people make this point now too, is in as much as a civilization is threatened externally, that will have internal threats or internal effects to freedom and liberty within that civilization.
Yes.
Right? It's the, in 1984, there always has to be a war with Eurasia or Oceania, right? Okay, there always has to be one. Why? Because that's what allows you to like get people to like give up their natural freedom, right? Okay, and so what Kant's saying here is we're not going to get over the internal antagonisms and the internal repression until we eliminate external threat, repression, antagonism, right? So he's saying we're not going to achieve freedom, full rationality until we now have like a generalized cosmopolitan world scheme. Okay. And he's saying this is going to happen. Why? Because we're rational and there's no way rational capacity will not be fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because And I am more thinking now of uh, Machiavelli, but never let, because just thinking with the dark side of this, but the truth of it, I mean, I think Kant's dead right actually in this, particularly this thesis, but never let an event go to waste. You know, if
Yeah,
you're in charge,
right,
and so it's one of those things of like we have to have these laws in place in order to have a civil society, and you have to be able to punish those who break that. But in a society, people have to come together and agree, right? And that's what it requires: two rational beings, three rational beings, a whole society of rational beings to say, yes, these laws make sense. That's why I will follow them, right?
right, right. Okay, now sixth thesis. I say let's read this whole one, okay? Because
Yep.
this one's pretty good. Okay, so sixth thesis. This thesis is this problem is the most difficult and the last to be solved by mankind. Okay, and here's his gloss on it. The difficulty which mere thought of this problem puts before our eyes is this: man is an animal which, if it lives among others of its kind, requires a master. For he certainly abuses his freedom with respect to other men, and although as a reasonable being he wishes to have a law which limits the freedom of all, his selfish animal impulses tempt him, where possible, to exempt himself from them. He thus requires a master who will break his will and force him to obey a will that is universally valid, under which each can be free. But whence does he get this master? Only from the human race. But then the master is himself an animal and needs a master. Let him begin it as he will. It is not to be seen how he can procure a magistracy which can maintain public justice and which is itself just, whether it be a single person or a group of several elected persons. For each of them will always thus abuse his freedom if he has none above him to exercise force in accord with laws. The highest master should be just in himself and yet a man. This task is therefore the hardest of all. Indeed, its complete solution is impossible. For from such crooked wood as man is made, of nothing perfectly straight can be built. That is, the last problem to be solved follows also from this. It requires that there be a correct conception of a possible constitution, great experience gained in many paths of life, and far beyond these, a goodwill ready to accept such a constitution. Three such things are very hard, and if they are ever to be found together, it will be very late and after many vain attempts.
Love that last
Yeah,
line.
yeah. Okay, so it's going to happen, but it's going to be hard, says Kant.
Yes.
Okay, because we ultimately, like Kant, he again and again throughout his writing says, ought does not imply is, ought does not imply is. Just because something ought to happen, it doesn't mean someone's going to do it. And so just because this is what the moral law ought to be doesn't mean that we're going to do it, right? Any one individual. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so how is it that we're going to assure, like, so Kant is perfectly happy to say maybe no one has ever really followed the moral law. That doesn't mean there isn't a moral law. It doesn't mean that we ought, that we not ought to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so so what gives you the confidence that we can ever assure that anyone's going to really follow the moral law? Well, Kant says because we need a master. Okay.
Yeah.
But then how are we going to get a master? Well, I don't know, because it would have to be a human being who's our master. I mean, this is the basic political problem of Plato's Republic right here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right there. Okay. And I think it's just as, open-ended question here as it was there. What I find interesting here, though, is this kind of talk of the unenlightened needing a master is going to be very welcomed by a group of fellas in Paris in 1789. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I mean, and this idea that there is an enlightened element of humanity that is more ideally rational than the rest is going to license all order of bad behavior in the name of progress, as
Yes.
we're going to see. Okay, as we're going to see. Okay, there's a lot of people who want to say that this very notion of personhood that Kant enlightens us about in these essays always entails as its shadow a concept of unpersonhood.
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think there's a bit of a slip in showing
Yes.
it right here in this passage. You know what I mean? If you're going to say, yeah, there's a possibility of this sort of radical freedom and moral commitment and enlightenment, et cetera, you're also implicitly saying that, and I mean, here explicitly saying not everybody's going to do that. And I think something you raised, maybe not everybody can do that, right?
Yes.
Or maybe there's other notions of enlightenment that
Yes.
could be on offer. And so then not everybody's going to be on board with our version of enlightenment. And when you couple that with talk of mastery, I think you got a problem. And I think we're going to see there's a problem with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I also really like the footnote on this one. So it's the second footnote down at the bottom. And it says, the role of man is very artificial. How it may be with the dwellers on other planets and their nature, we do not know. If, however, we carry out well the mandate given us by nature, we can perhaps flatter ourselves that we may claim among our neighbors in the cosmos no mean rank. Maybe among them each individual can perfectly attain his destiny in his own life. Among us it is different. Only the race can hope to attain it.
Yeah.
So it goes back to that kind of anti-individualism that's kind of inherent in all of this, that you're kind of a bit of a cog in the scheme of nature.
Yeah.
But you should still do your part, right? It's funny because what you mentioned of like the difficulty is if you think of yourself as enlightened and you now think other people are just cogs in a wheel. That doesn't end well for the cogs, so it's just this kind of, and it's also a great way to create racism, sexism, a lot of problems,
It did not end well for the indigenous people of the
Americas. Right.
I mean, I think that's really something to think about here, because and you might even say, hey, I'm just one more poor slob of a cog, but what I'm doing is on behalf of enlightenment.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is on behalf of the ultimate human progress of our achieving the kingdom of kings. And that means, hey, we're going to have to just go out and spread enlightenment. Okay. At the point of a sword, right? Whether that be in Brazil, right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or it be Iraq more recently, or, what have you. You see my point.
Yeah, absolutely.
This, I think, is where you get a lot of the impulse behind some of the ugliest colonialist moments in the notion of enlightenment progress. Right?
Yes. And even in our day, the progressivism is oftentimes associated with constant, other people are cogs. If you're not on the progressive train, then we don't need you.
Yeah.
Or we'll burn your thing down. So it's just kind of inherent in it that you will automatically separate yourself.
Right. Yeah. And think of it, and it can be like, I think there's a number of ways this can go. It can be, you could have this hierarchical view that, among like the human species, there are some capable of enlightenment, some that are not, right? And the ones that aren't, well, that they're grist for the wheel. Okay. Another way it could go is that, what you're saying is like whether or not someone is capable of enlightenment is not the question, because the object that we're worried about is the universal and not the particular at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if they're not on board, it's so much the worse for them, right? We're operating for something else, right?
Yeah.
And then I think there's a third way this can go wrong, and maybe this is more recently like what's been done is this idea that no, if we just gave everybody a chance to like see enlightenment the way we do, they'll just be on board, right? And then you go around and start like toppling governments, and you realize,
yeah, exactly.
No, they didn't really want you to do that to them.
Exactly.
Right? They had a vote in that, and that's not what they wanted. Yeah. So. All right. You want to do the seventh thesis?
Let's do it. The problem of establishing a perfect civic constitution is dependent upon the problem of a lawful external relation among states and cannot be solved without a solution of the latter problem.
And I think that really that's something that we hit earlier, in to say that you cannot have, in Kant's view, internal enlightenment unless you have universal enlightenment, right? Like you're not going to have it in the nation unless you have it geopolitically.
That's right.
Okay, so and then let's bump up to the eighth thesis then. Okay,
Let's do it.
I'll do it. The history of mankind can be seen in large as the realization of nature's secret plan to bring forth a perfectly constituted state as the only condition in which the capacities of mankind can be fully developed, and also bring forth that external relation among states, which is perfectly adequate to this end. Okay. So for Kant, history has secretly been working to bring about this completed state of universal cosmopolitan enlightenment. Why? And going back to the original point, if this wasn't a possibility or an eventuality, we would not be rational. Mm-hmm. We are rational, therefore this must be the case. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting how he uses war and even like tyranny potentially as kind of like a maybe unintended or not necessarily what nature wants to do, but it's what nature does because of the inherent antagonism that's in us, right?
Right.
But that because of that, and I love that it's secret because we literally can't know it, right?
Yeah,
we don't know what nature's doing.
It seems that what he's saying is like prior to the Enlightenment, we didn't know this was the plan.
Yeah.
Right? And then now that we've been liberated from our self-incurred tutelage, we can see this is the plan now, and then we can become active participants in it, right?
Yeah.
So I think he would say that we were kind of being moved around like pawns, and then like Copernicus came along and like woke us up, right?
Yeah.
And now we can become active, spontaneous participants in the process, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then in the final thesis, then he just says, quoting him, a philosophical attempt to work out a universal history according to a natural plan directed to achieving the civic union of the human race must be regarded as possible and indeed as contributing to this end of nature. So what he's saying is this is now our research project,
yep.
Right? What is this constitution that we have no idea what it'll be, but there must be one, damn it, because it's a condition of rationality.
Yes.
Right? So in the same way that Kant in the Critiques give you these transcendental arguments, right, where he argues that certain things must be the case given what we know to be the case de facto. So given that we have what he thinks are sound scientific judgments in Newtonian physics, what can I do to deduce the absolute conditions that makes it possible for us to make those judgments? And that becomes his metaphysics of epistemology there, right? Yeah. Same thing in ethics. Like, given that we have sound ethical judgments, what can I deduce about human nature or the human will, such that it makes that possible? And he does the same thing with aesthetic judgments in the third critique. Well, he's doing the same thing here. He's saying, given that we must be capable of this kind of cosmopolitan, like universal peace, mm-hmm. we should be able now to do a transcendental deduction of mm-hmm. what that constitution would be that would bring it about. He hasn't done it. I don't think he ever, well, I guess maybe in the later essay he attempts to do this, right? But that's the project for him now.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's kind of a secular reason for having hope regardless of setbacks. That's kind of what I'm getting out of like all of this is like, you have to keep going. No matter what. And in fact, you have to keep going because it's going whether you want it to or not. And so it's better to be an active participant in it. And it's interesting because like somebody like Christopher Dawson that reads largely it's religion that pushes culture and it's religion that pushes people towards some teleological end. Here he's saying it's human rationality and it's freedom. It's just kind of an interesting juxtaposition between him and some of the other philosophers of history.
Yeah, I think for Kant, it's now that we can separate ourselves from those what he calls pathological influences. He doesn't mean it in that they're sicknesses, just meaning that we're
pathos,
passive. They're pathos. We're passive with respect to them. Now that we're capable of self-determining action, follow the Enlightenment, that we can take control of it in a way that we couldn't under the influence of those kind of organic institutions, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think what he's saying is like, you didn't have a whole lot of progress, and then now, bing, we're going to get it because now we're going to take control of it, right?
Yeah.
And look, I mean, the 19th century was a pretty good ride, I guess, right? But then the 20th century, well, no, I shouldn't say that. The 19th century is a good ride for
certain people. Yeah.
certain people.
Yeah. Well, because even, I mean, it's funny because we progressed into the, Industrial Revolution, and yet, so now we can invent things faster, we can build things faster, yet the human person is losing a lot of what personhood is,
Welcome
by
to the
becoming a
16-hour
cog.
workday.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm sure eventually we'll get into, and eventually we'll get into Marx, and have his answer to this, because he certainly doesn't necessarily agree with Kant here.
And eventually, too, we should definitely do Hegel's answer to this, because this is absolutely not Hegel's view of a lot of this.
Yeah. Do you think that, of course, when we get into Hegel, we'll get even deeper into it, but there's a part where he calls it, what do you call it? Social unsociability. And it's kind of the antagonism thing, that you have these two forces kind of hitting each other every now and then, and it might cause a setback, but you have to keep going. Is there a little bit of dialectic inside of that, or is that
I think so, right?
Okay.
And keep in mind too that Hegel lifts the term dialectic from Kant, right?
Yeah.
But I think that the thing here with, of course, there's a lot of reads we could have on Hegel. Okay.
Yeah.
But on the read I prefer is Hegel doesn't think history's ending in some like complete lack of contradiction.
Yeah.
There is no actual conceptual content without contradiction for Hegel, right? So a situation where there's no contradiction would be a meaningless situation for Hegel, and I think that would be part of like what Hegel would critique in a piece like this, is this idea that you're going to get to a point of absolute uniformity, right? Like a public square wherein no one is alienated from that public square. Hegel would say it's impossible, nor would you want that.
Yeah.
I think that's the important thing. And I think for Hegel, there is this concession to the pathological, right? To the organic that you don't find in Kant, right?
Yeah. Well, great episode, man. This was 9 theses for everyone to, and I'll put the link in there so you can follow along. Like we said, this is like a 15-20 minute read. We're going to try to do that with every episode, I think, just because not everybody has a ton of time to sit down and read a whole tome. So
I'm assuming a lot of our listeners have real jobs, unlike me. So we want to keep the workload, the homework load, pretty low here on the Great Dangerous Books podcast.
Exactly.
And even when we do a bigger piece, we'll break it up multi episodes. So.
Yeah. Cool, man. Any last thoughts?
Once again, we continue to bid the listeners, the dozens of you, to subscribe, to comment, right?
Yep.
To share.
Absolutely.
Because the more the merrier here on the GDP.
Yeah. And I'd love for somebody to hop in and share their thoughts with us, right? Like what, if you agree or disagree, or if you think, Kant is absolutely 100% right or 100% wrong, would love to hear it,
Jump in. Yeah, definitely.
Jump in.
We are not proud men here.
Exactly. We're open to changing our mind, right? So
yeah. And next time, stay tuned. We're going to do our first piece of fictional literature.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah, so
cool. All right, man.
Cool,
Great
man.
episode.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks.